Welcome to Chippendales is an American biographical drama miniseries created by Robert Siegel, inspired by the book Deadly Dance, The Chippendales Murders by Scot Macdonald and Patrick MontesDeOca. It stars Kumail Nanjiani as Somen, Steve Banerjee, the founder of Chippendales. Welcome to Chippendales premiered on November 22nd, 2022 on Hulu. It received generally positive reviews from critics and earned 5 Primetime Emmy Award nominations, including acting nods for Nanjiani, Murray Bartlett, who plays famous dance choreographer Nick DeNoyer, Annalie Ashford as Irene Banerjee, Steve's wife, and Juliette Lewis as Denise Coughlin, a costume designer and Nick's business partner. The story revolves around Steve Banerjee, an Indian immigrant seeking the American dream. The story is chronicled in this true crime series laced with murder and sex. Steve managed to build the largest and first male strip joint, Chippendales, only to burn it down less than 10 years later and wound up being an accessory to murder. Upon the initial announcement, Kumail Nanjiani was announced to star in the series. Nanjiani was first offered the role in the series in 2017, but at the time wasn't sure if he wanted to play a bad guy Indian immigrant. By the time the project came around a few years later, he had a different perspective and was more open to portraying such a character. Just some background on the real Steve Banerjee. Somen, Steve Banerjee, was an Indian entrepreneur and the founder of the Chippendales. Somen Banerjee was born in Bombay, now Mumbai, India, on October 8, 1946. After operating a mobile gas station and a failed backgammon club, he moved to the United States. Banerjee bought a failed Los Angeles club named Destiny 2. He would later meet a nightclub promoter, Paul Snider, played by Dan Stevens in the show, with whom Banerjee transformed Chippendales from a backgammon club to a male stripping venue in 1979, the first of its kind in the United States. In the show, as in real life, Paul Snider would later kill his playmate and building actress, Dorothy Stratton, played in the show by Nicola Peltz-Beckham, with a shotgun before turning the weapon upon himself at their Los Angeles home. Police later determined that Snider had sexually assaulted Stratton before shooting her. She was only 20 years old. Banerjee then married an accountant, Irene, in the 1980s, and they had 2 children, daughter Lindsay and a son Christian. Banerjee was charged with enlisting the aid of Ray Colon, a former Palm Springs police officer and lounge room entertainer, to commit the murder of show producer Nick DeNoyer in 1987, and in 1990 and 1991 a plot to kill Michael Fullington, a former Chippendales dancer and choreographer, and 2 other ex-Chippendale dancers, who Banerjee felt were competition to the Chippendales franchise. He eventually pleaded guilty to attempted arson, racketeering, and murder for hire. He entered into a plea bargain that would have led to 26 years in prison and the loss of his share of Chippendales. In the early morning of October 23, 1994, hours before he was due to be sentenced, Banerjee was found dead in his cell, having hanged himself. Reports stated that while he was depressed, it was not thought he would take his own life. He was 48 years old. Now some background information on Nick DeNoyer. Nick DeNoyer was an American director, screenwriter, and choreographer, known for his work as a choreographer on the Chippendales dance troupe and for his work on Unicorn Tales shorts for young audiences, for which he won 2 Emmy Awards. DeNoyer was married to Jennifer O'Neill from 1975 to 1976, although he was a closeted homosexual. On April 7, 1987, at 3:40 p.m., DeNoyer was shot in the face with a large-caliber pistol while sitting in his 15th-floor office desk at 264 West 40th Street, Manhattan, located near the Garment District. DeNoyer was 45 years old at the time of the murder. He was shot by Gilberto Rivera Lopez, recruited by Ray Colon, accomplice of Somen, Steve Banerjee, who originally hired Colon to murder DeNoyer. At the time, DeNoyer was no longer working for Banerjee, but had a licensing arrangement through a company called Chippendales Universal to use the name Chippendales for tour engagements. Banerjee was dissatisfied with the business arrangement, which was memorialized on a cocktail napkin. Banerjee tried to unsuccessfully break the contract in New York courts. The murder of Nick DeNoyer was orchestrated by Banerjee, along with the burning of a competitor's Red Onion nightclub. Banerjee pleaded guilty to the murder, arson, and RICO charges in July of 1994. Some interesting trivia notes. The character of Denise, played by Juliette Lewis, is not a real person, but does share some similarities with Candice Mayerson, who is affiliated with the Chippendales. Steve and Irene Banerjee also had a son named Christian, who is not depicted in the series. Christian works as a male stripper under the name Christian Bain, and as of 2022 had started his own male revue called Chippendales. The character of Otis, who is loosely based on Chippendales' first black dancer, Hodri Sabubu. Like Otis on the series, Sabudu was excluded from the Chippendales calendar and quit after getting into a fight with Steve Banerjee when he tried to make his own calendar. Though unlike Otis's character who shook Banerjee's hand and left, Sabubu punched Banerjee over a financial dispute. Sabubu started his own male revue show featuring black dancers called Lady Killers. There is no indication that Irene Banerjee ever left Steve as depicted in the series. They also did not divorce until 1994, when Steve was arrested and pled guilty to the charges against him. Following Steve's arrest, Irene organized a group of character witnesses in an attempt to get him a reduced sentence. When Steve committed suicide before his sentencing and the US government was unable to seize his shares of Chippendales as per his plea deal, Irene inherited the shared properties and financial assets associated with the company. Irene sold Chippendales to a private owner for $2.5 million. She passed away from breast cancer on February 8, 2001. A major person of importance in the real story of the FBI's investigation into Nick Denoy's murder and Steve Banerjee's eventual arrest and conviction is not depicted in the series, namely an FBI informant codenamed Strawberry. Strawberry was hired by Ray Colon to kill two former Chippendales dancers who had started their own male revue called Adonis Men of Hollywood, which was touring in the United Kingdom at the time. Strawberry did not go through with the killings, instead returning to the States and informing the FBI of the plot, which led them to Colon, who cooperated with the FBI to get a taped confession from Banerjee in exchange for a reduced sentence. Strawberry went into witness protection and was later interviewed for the 2021 documentary series, The Curse of the Chippendales. In the series, Ray Colon is depicted as a handyman hired by Irene. In real life, Colon was a former Palm Springs police officer and lounge room entertainer who frequented the bar Chippendales. Like on the series, Colon was hired by Steve Banerjee to have Nick Denoy killed. Now, I found this to be an absolutely superb show, and even though I knew a lot about Chippendales, I never really knew much about its founding. I'd heard of the name Steve Banerjee before, but I had no clue how complicated, dark and tragic the story really was. This is truly a rags to riches, and then a downfall story again. This is a man who had everything. He had come up with a novel, unique idea, and had made an absolute fortune from it, yet it wasn't enough for him. He couldn't stop his ego, his insecurities, and his lack of trust within those around him to let bygones be bygones and just enjoy his riches that he created for himself. It truly is a tragic story. Here we had a man who came from nothing in India, worked at a gas station for 5 years to save up just enough money to buy his own nightclub. And then eventually, by chance or by pure circumstance, he came up with the idea of having male strippers and now opening up to a brand new market and entertaining women for a change. The partnership he forms here with Nick Denoy was a fascinating one. They were basically two sides of a coin, but worked so well together. Steve was the accountant. He was the businessman, where Nick was, of course, the creative dancer. And the combination of their two fantastic talents made for a very successful business. But unfortunately, they just could not see eye to eye, and eventually it resulted in one of them being killed and the other committing suicide. This truly is a tragic, sad, yet fascinating tale of greed, corruption, ego, insecurity, and one man's ambition basically killing him off. The acting performances here are absolutely outstanding. Kumail Nanjiani turns in a career-best performance here as Steve. His acting is layered and nuanced, and he does so much acting just with his eyes alone. Murray Bartlett once again turns out a fantastic performance here as the overly flamboyant and charismatic Nick Denoy, and the scenes between him and Steve just light up the screen as there's so much tension and angst between them. Once again, it's an outstanding performance from Juliette Lewis, who really cannot put a foot wrong, and Annalie Ashford is also superb here as Steve's wife, Irene. The costumes and the sets are absolutely outstanding, and I love the use of different types of songs from that era. All in all, this is a fantastically well-made show that really provides you with an insight into a fascinating, if not yet tragic tale of one man's greed and ambition overriding his own sense of morality. From its phenomenal performances, fantastic attention to detail, and just fascinating look into this real-life horror story, Welcome to Chippendales gets a 9.5 out of 10.